This is State versus Edward Cherry. And Mr. Cherry, it's my understanding that after having had time to think about it, work with your lawyer, have your lawyer work very hard on your behalf, negotiating with the prosecutor, that you have reached a point where you're interested in entering a plea that would resolve all 4 of the cases. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if you don't mind, you can be right where you are. Just shift the monitor so that Ms. Rivers can see you. You can either move over or rotate that.
I'll just move over.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. If you'll raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, or I'm sorry. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in the matters pending before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, put your hand down. So each indictment, so we'll start with 20. Do you understand that in indictment number 24 SC 002881, you're charged with 1 count of murder, 1 count of felony murder, and 1 count of aggravated assault?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you understand that in indictment number 21 SC 179206, you're charged with 4 counts of aggravated assault against a police officer, 3 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, 2 counts of fleeing and attempting to elude, count 10, interference with government property, counts 11, 12, and 13 are all obstruction charges, misdemeanor charges, and then the last count, count 14, is possession of a firearm by a convicted felon.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then in the 23 SC 187449, do you understand that you're charged with 1 count of hijacking a motor vehicle in the first degree, 1 count of armed robbery, 1 count of kidnapping, 1 count of aggravated assault, and then a count of possession of a firearm in the commission of a felony, and then also possession of a firearm by a convicted felon?
Don't you already got that charge?
You did hear the same charge more than once, but one of the cases relates to you supposedly possessing a gun in connection with a shootout you had with the police.
Yes, sir.
And another charge about you having a gun relates to a kidnapping situation. The two different situations.
I understand. Okay.
And then the last case is 24 SC 000558. Do you understand for that case, you're charged with 1 count of aggravated assault?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And anything about the charges that I just read from each one of the indictments, do you have any questions as it relates to them for your attorney, Ms. Cabrera?
No, sir.
Okay. And sir, do you understand that you have the right to plead either guilty or not guilty to these charges? And if you chose to plead not guilty or remain silent, you would receive a jury trial?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And okay. Have you had enough time to discuss with your attorney all the facts and circumstances of each of the cases that you're pleading guilty to today?
Yes, sir.
And are you satisfied with the services that Ms. Cabrera has provided?
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Cabrera, do you waive formal reading of each indictment for each of Mr. Cherry's cases for the purposes of this hearing?
So wait.
Do you also waive any and all defects in each of the indictments just referenced a few minutes ago, including any with respect to your client's name for the purposes of this hearing?
Also wait.
And Mr. Cherry, has your attorney advised you of the minimum and maximum sentence you could receive for each charge that you're pleading guilty for here
Yes, sir.
today? And I'll start with indictment number 24 SC 002881. Did Ms. Cabrera advise that for counts 1 and 2, murder and felony murder, that the minimum sentence you could receive is life and the maximum you could receive is life without the possibility of parole?
Yes, sir.
And as it relates to the aggravated assault charge, the minimum is 1 year, the maximum being 20 years.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And for indictment number 21 SC 179206, the aggravated assault counts as it relates to that indictment, the same 1 to 20 years.
Is it 1 to 20 or is it a higher?
Right.
I think it may be 3 because it was peace officers.
That's correct. I apologize. The judge is absolutely correct. So this is the same aggravated assault count or charges, but since they involve a peace officer or police officer, the minimum is 3 years, the maximum is 20 years.
Okay.
Okay. And then as it relates to possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, do you understand that those counts require a 5-year sentence that must run consecutive, but it can be suspended, probated, or served in prison?
So how does that work?
So for that count, the judge is required to sentence you to 5 years, but within his discretion, he can either sentence you to serve the 5-year sentence that's consecutive to the other counts, either on probation. So if you're ever to get out of prison, you'd serve it on probation.
Okay.
Or it can be suspended, meaning that it's like probation, but no one is watching over you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the last option the judge has, you serve it in prison while you're serving your other sentences.
Okay.
Okay. You have any other questions about that?
No.
All right. And then do you understand that for the fleeing counts 8 and 9, the minimum is 1 year, the maximum is 5 years?
Yes, sir.
And then I'm going to motion the court to null pros counts 10, 11, 12, and 13, which means dismiss
Yes,
as it
sir.
relates to the interference with government property and the obstruction charges. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And the last count 14, is possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Do you understand that the minimum is 1 year, the maximum is 10 years?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And as it relates to the 23 SC 187449, for the first count in that indictment is hijacking a motor vehicle in the first degree. Do you understand that the minimum is 10 years, or its sentence is 10 to 20, or it could be a life sentence?
Okay.
And as it relates to armed robbery, do you understand that the minimum is 10 years, but it's 10 to 20 or life, just like the hijacking?
Okay.
And kidnapping is actually the same. So it's the same sentence range, the 10 to 20, or it could be a life sentence.
Okay.
Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
And then we've already gone over aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Do you have any additional questions as it relates to the minimum maximum?
No.
No. Okay. And then your last case, which is just the one count of aggravated assault in indictment number 24 SC 000558. Do you have any additional questions about the minimum maximum for aggravated assault?
No, sir.
Okay. And do you need any additional time to talk with Ms. Cabrera as it relates to any of the minimum and maximum sentences we just discussed here today?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So,
Guilty.
no.
Okay. And Mr. Cherry, has anyone forced, threatened, or promised you anything to get you to enter a guilty plea on all of the 4 cases that we referenced today?
No, sir.
And is it your decision to waive your rights or the rights that we just discussed and enter a guilty plea on each one of the indictments?
Yes, sir.
24 SC 002881, 21 SC 179206, 23 SC 187449, and then 24 SC 000558, because you're in fact guilty, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And we'll start with the first indictment, 24 SC 002881. How do you plead to count 1, murder?
Guilty.
Okay. How do you plead to count 2, felony murder?
Guilty.
And how do you plead to count 3 of that indictment, aggravated assault?
Guilty.
And in indictment number 21 SC 179206, how do you plead to counts 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are aggravated assaults against a peace officer or police officer?
Guilty.
And how do you plead to counts 5 and 6, which are both possessions of firearms during the commission of a felony counts?
Guilty.
And how do you plead to count 7? It's the same count. I apologize. Possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony.
Guilty.
And then counts 8 and 9 are both fleeing and attempting to elude. How do you plead, sir?
Guilty.
And like we discussed, I'm dismissing counts 10, 11, 12, and 13. And then the last count, count 14, how do you plead to possession of a firearm by a convicted felon?
Guilty.
All right, in indictment number 23 SC 187449, how do you plead to count 1, hijacking a motor vehicle in the first degree?
Guilty.
And how do you plead to count 2, armed robbery?
Guilty.
And how do you plead to the third count in that indictment, kidnapping?
Guilty.
And count 4, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. How do you plead, sir?
Guilty.
And then count 5 is possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. How do you plead, sir?
Guilty.
And the last count on that indictment is possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. How do you plead, sir?
Guilty.
And in your last case, which is 24 SC 000558, how do you plead to the single count of aggravated assault?
Guilty.
Okay. And is these guilty pleas in each one of the indictments we just read freely and voluntarily given, Mr. Cherry, with full knowledge of all the charges we just talked about against you?
Yes, sir.
And do you understand that you may only have a limited right to appeal this guilty plea conviction, sir?
Yes, sir.
Do you also understand that you only have 4 years from today for a felony charge and 12 months from today for a misdemeanor charge to file what's called a habeas corpus petition challenging this guilty plea?
Yes, sir.
And have you had an opportunity to ask any questions, if you have any, as it relates to a habeas corpus petition challenging this guilty plea with Ms. Cabrera?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do you have any questions at this time?
No, sir.
Okay. Your Honor, had the state proceeded to trial, the state would have been able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt we'll start with the case 24 SC 002881, the case involving the 2 murder counts on April 4th of 2024 at approximately 6:25 p.m. Mr. Edward Cherry was housed or living at the Fulton County Jail here at 901 Rice Street. He was in the same pod or area with the victim, Mr. Leonard Fortner, just Fortner. Mr. Fortner was actually laying on, I guess they call it at the jail, a boat, so a cot outside of a cell because of overcrowding. And as he was laying there sleeping, the defendant can be seen on the video surveillance at the jail taking what was measured later as a 9-inch shank and stabbing Mr. Fortner first in the chest. Mr. Fortner then does get up and attempts to kind of run through the area of cell block 600. He is unable to escape Mr. Cherry and the shank, and then Mr. Cherry proceeds to stab him an additional 22 times on his head, his chest, and all over his torso and extremities, Your Honor. Due to the extent of the stabbing that Mr. Fortner did receive on April 4th, he died as a result of all of his injuries, Your Honor. As it relates to case number 21 SC 179206, Your Honor, on April
4th, it was 4 years to the day.
April 4th, 2020.
2020.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Cherry was traveling in what the officers determined to be a stolen vehicle, which we would later learn was the vehicle that that the charges involve the kidnapping case 23 SC 187449.
Was the carjacking of Miss Carter in that other case?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Because there was be on the lookout for the blue Nissan, Your Honor, many officers from College Park and Union City, as well as Hateville, spotted the car. 3 of the officers was Officer Landrum, Officer Dorsey, and Officer Dunn, began to follow and attempt to pull Mr. Cherry over as he traveled within the bounds of Fulton County. And I apologize, it's a 2010 Honda CRV, not a Nissan. I apologize.
Okay.
And eventually, GSP also got involved. They were able to do a pit maneuver, causing Mr. Cherry to be forced to stop the vehicle. As soon as the vehicle came to a stop, Mr. Cherry came out of the vehicle and began firing his weapon in the direction of Officer Landrum, Dorsey, and Dunn, actually striking Officer Landrum twice, once in the chest, but luckily he had a bulletproof vest on. Once the bullet hit the bulletproof vest, it then ricocheted off the vest and hit him in the neck, causing him to be injured fairly severely and being rushed to Grady Hospital. Luckily, he did survive, and shortly thereafter, Mr. Cherry was then taken into custody and taken to the Fulton County Jail here at 901 Rice Street, Your Honor. As it relates to indictment number 23, SC 187449, it's the case involving Miss Crystal Carter. And it was the same day, actually April 4th of 2020. Miss Carter was sitting in the vehicle waiting for one of her coworkers the actual owner of the vehicle, Mr. Mizell, M-I-Z-E-L-L. While she was waiting for Mr. Mizell, the defendant opened the driver's side door, held Miss Carter at gunpoint, and then while Miss Carter was in the vehicle and holding her at gunpoint, gets into the Honda CRV and begins driving away with Miss Carter in it. During the travel, while Miss Carter and Mr. Cherry are in the vehicle alone, there's a lot of discussion between the defendant and Miss Carter about ultimately her fate and that he was going to kill her. But ultimately, Mr. Cherry spared Miss Carter. I think he informed her that she was somebody who was incredibly attractive, and because of her beauty, that he was going to let her live. Unlike other people, he had recently killed and was on the run from in Clayton County as well as in Jacksonville, Your Honor. Last case is 24 SC 000558, the one count of aggravated assault. It is an additional stabbing in the jail, and the indictment involves Mr. Reginald Bryant and Mr. Cherry, both who were inmates in the Fulton County Jail on September 20th of 2022. Very similar to the case that we spoke about earlier that ended in Mr. Fortner's demise. In this case, Mr. Jermaine Davis, Jermaine, was also stabbed with a shank by the defendant, Mr. Cherry, as well as Mr. Bryant. He was stabbed approximately 30 times, but luckily the stab wounds that Mr. Davis received were not nearly as deep, and the shanks that were used to stab Mr. Davis were not nearly as long, which allowed him to survive the injuries that he received in September of 2022 while he was also a resident of the Fulton County Jail in 901 Rice Street, Your Honor. Had those cases proceeded to trial, Your Honor, that's what the state would have been able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The state did file a recidivist notice as it relates to Mr. Cherry. He is an ANC recidivist. We're going to be withdrawing that notice based on Mr. Cherry's willingness to accept responsibility for each and every one of the cases that we've just discussed. For lack of better words, as it relates to the murder case, for count one, the state and the defense recommendation would be that Mr. Cherry receive a life sentence. Count two, felony murder, would vacate by operation of law, and then count three, aggravated assault, would merge with count one. And all the other cases are to run concurrent with the murder case, Your Honor. I have a recommendation, but I can leave it to the full discretion of the court because the murder case doesn't leave a whole lot of discretion. So I will leave it in the full discretion of the court.
Okay, got it. Reginald Bryant, any idea his status? I see now he's a co-defendant with Mr. Cherry in that other 24 SC case. I'll work on it with Ms. Nelson, but sometimes with these cases, there's someone who's off on to the Department of Corrections because the case is a little old.
I'll have an announcement by the time we're
Okay.
finished with this case.
Bryant has multiple
Other
members.
cases? Okay.
I had Reginald Bryant for a short time.
Yeah, Mr. Luemba is listed as his lawyer now, so,
Yeah, I had to conflict off of Reginald Bryant, but he has multiple.
okay, we'll sort through that. That's not Mr. Cherry's business. I just was curious because that case will stay open. I mean, it's on judicial hold because he must have other situations, like you said. Okay.
Very briefly, what I forgot to, inform the court is Mr. Cherry was, for some reason, he was brought to Fulton County, which led to obviously the death of Mr. Fortner. But
Yes, the record should be very clear that Mr. Cherry was where he ought to have been, which is Clayton County, and Judge Jewel Scott had him returned here. And Mr. Fortner's family lost Mr. Fortner because Judge Jewel Scott didn't keep Mr. Cherry where he had an older and more serious case. Until there was a murder here, his most serious case in the state of Georgia was in Clayton County.
And had she kept him there, Mr. Davis would probably not have been stabbed as well in September But he does have a pending double homicide in Clayton County, which I'm not sure why that has not been reached. And speaking with the district attorney's office over there, as well as a double homicide still pending out of Jacksonville, Florida.
Right. Got it. Let me ask, we do have pretrial services on the call. If they could just share with me any information they have. Hi there, Ms. Hardy.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. This defendant has 22 arrests out of Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida. There's a 2019 felony conviction out of North Carolina for financial card fraud and a attempt to obtain property under false pretense. And then out of Florida, there's 3 felony convictions, one in 2005 for uttering a forged bill, 2008 robbery with a firearm, and 2008 possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Nothing further to report.
Thank you so much. Ms. Cabrera.
Yes, Judge. For the case at 24 SC 002881, I'm asking that Your Honor accept that plea is negotiated and that on the remaining 3 cases, that whatever Your Honor deems appropriate as far as sentencing, that they just all run concurrent to that existing, the case ending in 881.
Got it. Okay.
I've had an opportunity to speak with him. We spoke for a good long while. And at our last meeting, he was interested in accepting responsibility. And so I asked the court we could bring him over so that we can resolve that. The other thing that I would ask is if we could contact Clayton County, and perhaps Clayton County can receive him from here as opposed to him going to Jackson for classification and then having to come back.
Sure. So I'm going to let the sheriff manage that. I am confident that the sheriff's going to want to get Mr. Cherry to his next destination ASAP. It would make sense for that to be Clayton so that you aren't going into the state system and coming back out. But Clayton has been handling your case in a way that escapes me. I don't understand why they didn't have you there and deal with that case. It would have spared a lot of people a lot of grief and made your life less complicated. But I can't speak for them. It would be great if you went to Clayton, but I don't control that part. I'll just make sure that you are at least moving on your way, whether that means to the State Department of Corrections or to Clayton County, as soon as I sign the paperwork later today. Okay? Mr. Cherry, I promised you after I heard from the prosecutor and from your lawyer that I turned to you to see if you had any questions or if there was anything else you wanted to add.
No, sir.
Okay. Well, Mr. Cherry, I find there's a factual basis for your pleas in each of the 4 cases. I also find that your pleas are knowing and voluntary. Voluntary means no one's forcing you to enter these pleas. But now that you've got a lawyer who's stuck with you and you have cycled through a few lawyers, not your fault, but the way that we assign lawyers, you've had to have what we call a conflict attorney, not because you have conflicts with people, which sounds like you do, but not with your lawyers. It just, the public defender couldn't take your case because they had represented one or more people who were either witnesses in your case or victims in your case. But Ms. Cabrera has stuck with it, and I find that she has counseled you wisely, and that I am finding that you are voluntarily entering into these pleas. Do you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
And you don't have any questions about anything that was discussed?
No, sir.
All right. Mr. Abate, do the officers from the high-speed chase and shooting at officers know how generally these cases are being resolved?
Yes, Your Honor, I made contact with all of the officers. In particular, he's now Lieutenant Landrum. He was obviously satisfied with how the cases were being disposed of and did not need to be here today, he said.
Got it. Okay, good. And then I don't know what kind of contact your office has had with Mr. Fortner's family. If there's a family there for him, have they been advised?
I was unable to get in contact with the family members that I could see that we were aware of at the beginning, but we did attempt to make contact. We also attempted to make contact with Ms. Carter. I was unable to get a hold of her. I left several voicemails on numbers I believe to be hers, but the attempts were made, and I understand these are old cases, especially for her.
Sure. Okay. Thank you for that. Mr. Cherry, I'm going to march through your sentences now. I'm going to be saying a whole lot of numbers. I will sum it up at the end so you can hear what it all means, okay? But up front, I'm letting you know that your sentences across all four cases will run concurrently with each other, meaning at the same time.
Okay.
For 24 SC 002881, that is the murder of Mr. Fortner at the county jail, your sentence as to count 1 is life imprisonment. Count 2 will be vacated by operation of law, and count 3 merges into count 1. So your sentence on that case is life. You will get credit for the time you've been in, and you have been in for almost 5 years now.
Yeah.
You went into custody in 2020 and have been in custody continuously. I know you bounced between here and Clayton County, but the clock for your sentence has been running that entire time. In 21 SC 179206, I'm sentencing you to 20 years to serve on each of the first 4 counts. They will run concurrently with each other. Counts 5, 6, and 7 all have to be 5 years, and they have to run consecutive to the longest other count. So they'll be consecutive to count 1, and they'll be 5 years to serve. The fleeing and attempting to elude, were those felonies or misdemeanors?
They were felonies, Your Honor.
Okay.
They would merge.
They merge into each other?
I'm sorry, count 9 would merge into count 8. I apologize.
Got it. So 9 merges into 8. 8 is 5 years to serve concurrent with count 1. 10, 11, 12, and 13 are being dismissed by the state. And the final count is 10 years to serve concurrent with count 1. So your sentence as to the case ending in 206 is 25 years to serve. That runs at the same time with your life sentence. In 23 SC 187449, your sentence as to hijacking a motor vehicle is life. Your sentence as to armed robbery is life. Those will run concurrently with each other and concurrently with that life sentence in the murder case. Kidnapping will be 15 years to serve. Aggravated assault, 20 years to serve. Those will run concurrently with count 1. The second to last count, let me count here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Count 5 has to be 5 years and it has to be consecutive, but I will suspend that. And then count 6 is 5 years to serve concurrent with count 1. So your sentence in the carjacking kidnapping case with Ms. Carter is life plus 5, but those 5 years are suspended. There's no time that you serve on that. And finally, the stabbing of Mr. Davis, where you had or Davies, where you had a co-defendant, Mr. Bryant, that's aggravated assault is 1 count, is 20 years to serve. That'll run concurrently with all the other cases. So again, your sentence is life. You heard me say several life sentences. They're running concurrently with each other. And then it's plus 5, but suspended because of that 1 gun count in the carjacking case.
I have a question.
Please.
Is when you say life, is that with or without the possibility of parole?
It's a parolable situation right now. The state removed its recidivist notice because of your criminal history. The thing you heard the official from pretrial services talk about, you have enough felonies where had you gone to trial, the state would have kept in place this notice where I'd be required to make it without parole. So you are parole eligible. I'm not going to surprise you by saying you're not going to look real good on paper to parole because you have a pretty messy criminal history. That doesn't mean you're ineligible for parole. It means there'll be reasons why the parole board, when they do take your case up for consideration, will say, Mr. Cherry has had a pretty scary past. Now, you've got a bunch of time before you're parole eligible. And if between now and then you do things differently than how you did things at Rice Street, that will give you a better chance. But you need to understand, Ms. Cabrera is not the parole board. I'm not the parole board. That is an independent body. and they don't call me up and say, what do you think about Mr. Cherry or anything like that. Victims' families are given a chance to be heard. You're given a chance to be heard, but it's a completely different forum. And it's nothing you need to worry about for a little while because your parole eligibility is a ways down the road. But coming out of Fulton County, you are parole eligible.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Cabrera, anything else on behalf of your client, Mr. Cherry?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Abate, anything else?
Only thing, Your Honor, it's as to the first case, he would get credit from the time of April 4th, 2024 for that case, the murder case, because it occurred on April 4th of 2024. So that wouldn't credit that sentence because he wasn't serving.
You are correct. I need to correct myself. I was, because we're running all these concurrently, I was like, your clock has been running since you went into custody. Your clock obviously wasn't running, your time served clock, in connection with the stabbing death of Mr. Fortner, because that didn't happen in 2020. But you have been in continuous custody in connection with the kidnapping and carjacking of Ms. Carter, as well as the shooting of the officers, to include Lieutenant Landrum. The 5-ish years, it's not quite 5 yet, we're 4 years and 11 months. You get credit as to those sentences for those 5 years. For the murder of Mr. Fortner, you will have a year under your belt about a month from today. So all the days you've been in custody since that incident, you get credit for, but you can't get credit for time you've been in custody that occurred before the time of the crime. But that's hopefully that makes sense to you. That's how it ought to work. Okay. Thank you for flagging that, Mr. Bante. And I'll make sure that the final dispositions reflect that the clock starts similarly for the stabbing of Mr. Davis. That's September of 2022 and not April of 2020. All right. Mr. Cherry, I will make sure that we get you to your next destination very, very soon. I just don't know if that's Clayton or if it is the Department of Corrections. Okay?
He's got a whole.
Question, Judge, is he on loan out to us from Clayton or he?
No.
That's a great question. For whatever reason, even though the murder in Clayton has to have occurred before all of this stuff, because he's been in continuous custody, we have always been able to have to take Mr. Cherry back when Clayton says we're done with him.
Maybe on loan out. If he on loan
Yeah.
out,
He's on loan out, then he goes back.
he go back to Clayton.
Right, but I don't think it's loan out, because his very first arrest in connection with all this was after the shootout with the College Park police officers. And then after that time, he was indicted in Clayton for something that happened before that. So I think we were loaning him to Clayton and strongly encouraged them to keep him because there was a double homicide there. And at one point in time, there was no murder here because this stabbing in the jail was very, very recent. And so our point was, Clayton, keep him, try the murder. All these other cases will follow on behind that. And a judge there said, nah, he needs to go back to Fulton. So I don't believe he was loaned to us by Clayton.
Like he would be shipped to DOC.
I think that's right. But we will certainly let Clayton know if you want to handle your business, now's the time to do it.
And I'll call and see whatever it is that I can do, if anybody is willing to listen, to see if they can actually take him to Clayton as opposed to let him take it.
I know the DA's office, the buck stops with that judge. DA's office tried and didn't get traction. I tried and didn't get traction, but we'll be working on that. Okay? All right. Colonel, if I could talk to you unless you got to go with Mr. Cherry, I got a quick unrelated question for you.
One